There are moments in life when keeping a secret becomes your greatest protection, and I learned this at 67, standing in my late husband's study while my daughter and her husband discussed my limited options in the next room as if I were already incapacitated. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to follow this story to its shocking conclusion. My name is Eleanor Sullivan, and I've been a widow for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks since my beloved husband Thomas took his final breath in our bedroom, surrounded by the antique furniture we'd collected over 4 decades of marriage. 3 weeks since I held his weathered hand and promised him I'd be brave. What I didn't promise, what I couldn't have imagined I'd need to promise, was that I'd protect myself from our own daughter. The morning after Thomas's funeral, I stood in our ensuite bathroom, applying the same coral lipstick I'd worn for 30 years. My reflection showed a woman who'd gracefully navigated nearly 7 decades, auburn hair now silver white, pulled back in the elegant chignon Thomas had always loved, green eyes that still sparked with intelligence despite recent tears. I'd lost weight during Thomas's final illness, but I carried myself with the poise that came from 40 years as a classical music teacher, when commanding respect from teenage musicians meant everything. Our Victorian home in Salem, Oregon felt impossibly quiet without Thomas's presence. We'd lived here for 35 years, watching the historic neighborhood evolve while our 3-story house with its bay windows and wraparound porch remained our constant sanctuary. Thomas had lovingly restored every detail: the original hardwood floors, the ornate crown molding, the crystal chandelier in the dining room where we'd hosted countless dinner parties for the symphony community. I brewed tea in Thomas's favorite china cup from the set his grandmother had brought from England, then poured it out when I realized what I'd done. The silence pressed against me like a physical weight. We'd had our rhythms, Thomas and I, morning tea in the garden, evening concerts at the university, weekend antiquing trips to coastal towns. Simple pleasures that comprised a life rich in culture and quiet contentment. The doorbell chimed at precisely 10 a.m. I knew it would be Claire, my 43-year-old daughter, and her husband Derek. They'd been attentive during Thomas's final months, organizing medical appointments and handling funeral arrangements. I'd been grateful then, mistaking their efficiency for devotion. Claire stood on my doorstep in her black Armani suit, every inch the successful real estate attorney she'd become. She had Thomas's height and my green eyes, though hers held a calculating coldness I didn't remember from her childhood. Derek flanked her in an expensive charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced from years of managing his investment firm. "Mom," Claire said, stepping forward to embrace me. "How are you managing?" "I'm surviving," I replied, inhaling her expensive perfume and wondering when my little girl had started wearing fragrances that cost more than I used to spend on groceries. Derek kissed my cheek with professional warmth. "Eleanor, you look tired. Are you sleeping?" "As well as can be expected." We drove to the lawyer's office in Derek's Mercedes, me relegated to the back seat like a passenger in my own life. I watched Salem's familiar streets pass by. The music store where I'd bought sheet music for 4 decades, the cafe where Thomas and I had shared Sunday brunch, the university where we'd both taught until retirement. Everything looked the same, yet felt utterly changed. The meeting with Thomas's attorney was brief and formal. Robert Mitchell had handled our affairs for 20 years, but Thomas had always managed our personal finances himself. What Robert revealed was standard: the house, our cars, modest retirement accounts that had supported us comfortably. What he didn't reveal, what Thomas had specifically instructed him not to discuss, were the private investments and accounts Thomas had built over decades of careful financial planning. "Your husband left everything in perfect order," Robert said, handing me a folder. "The house is yours outright, along with the retirement accounts and life insurance. You should be quite comfortable." Claire and Derek exchanged meaningful glances. I caught the look, satisfaction mixed with calculation. They thought they understood my financial situation. They were catastrophically wrong. That evening, Claire and Derek stayed for dinner. I'd prepared Thomas's favorite beef Wellington, needing the familiar ritual of elaborate cooking to occupy my hands and mind. We sat in the formal dining room where Claire had done homework as a child, where Thomas and I had entertained fellow musicians and academics, where I'd served Thanksgiving dinner to our small family every year since Claire was born. "Mom," Claire began, cutting her meat with surgical precision, "Derek and I have been discussing your situation." I set down my fork, something in her tone making my stomach clench. "We're concerned about you," Derek added, his voice carrying that particular brand of patronizing concern that wealthy people perfect. "Living alone in this enormous house, managing everything by yourself." "I've been managing quite well for 67 years, I said evenly. Claire leaned forward, her expression earnest in that way that reminded me of when she was 12 and trying to explain why she'd broken my favorite vase. "Dad handled all the finances, all the paperwork, the house maintenance, the insurance. It's overwhelming for anyone to manage alone. Your father taught me well. But you shouldn't have to struggle through it alone," Derek continued. "We've been researching some excellent senior living communities. Beautiful places, Mom, garden courtyards, cultural activities, medical staff available around the clock." The words hit me like ice water. Senior living. Just like that. "Just to look, Mom," Claire said quickly. "Just to see what's available." I studied their faces across the polished mahogany table. Claire with her practiced concern, Derek with his calculated sympathy. Neither had asked what I wanted. Neither had suggested I might prefer to stay in the home Thomas and I had lovingly restored together. "I'm not ready to give up my independence," I said carefully. "Of course not," Derek rushed to assure me. "But think about it. No more worrying about furnace repairs or roof maintenance. No more cooking if you don't want to. No more rattling around in this big house all alone. And if something happened," Claire added, "if you fell or had a medical emergency." "Nothing's going to happen to me, Mom. You're not getting any younger." Claire's voice carried a note of impatience I recognized from her teenage years. "Dad's gone, and we're your family now. We just want what's best for you." After they left, I sat in Thomas's leather chair in his study, surrounded by his books on music theory and philosophy. This room had been his sanctuary, lined with first editions and scores from obscure 18th century composers. But it was also something else. It was where he'd kept his secrets. I went to Thomas's desk and pulled out the folder Robert Mitchell had given me to bring to our next meeting. Inside were documents Thomas had left specifically for me, documents that would change everything. His letter was written in the careful script I'd loved for 40 years, dated 6 months before his diagnosis. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing decisions I pray you'll never have to make. But knowing our daughter as I've come to know her these past few years, I suspect you will. Claire is not the child we raised. I don't know when she changed, or if she was always this calculating and we were too loving to see it. But she sees you as a liability now, and she sees your inheritance as her entitlement. Derek has encouraged this mindset, and together they will try to convince you that you're helpless, that you need their management. You are not helpless. You never have been. The enclosed documents will show you exactly how much your life is worth to them, and to you. Use this knowledge wisely. Use it to protect yourself, and to teach them what family truly means. I love you, Margaret. I trust you to do what's right. Forever yours, Thomas." My hands trembled as I set the letter aside and examined the next document. It was a summary of assets that took my breath away. Thomas's modest university pension had been supplemented by decades of shrewd investments. The music lessons he'd given privately, the guest conducting he'd done with regional orchestras, the royalties from his compositions, all of it carefully invested and compounded over 40 years. The house was worth $850,000 and completely paid off. Thomas had left me his restored 1965 Jaguar E-Type, worth $90,000, which he'd kept in pristine condition in our garage. But it was the investment accounts that made me grip the arm of his chair, $1.2 million in carefully diversified portfolios that bore only my name. Claire and Derek assumed we'd lived on Thomas's modest professor's salary and my teacher's pension. They thought I had perhaps $100,000 in savings, enough to make me worth controlling, not enough to make me truly independent. They were wrong on both counts. I locked the documents back in Thomas's desk drawer and sat in the gathering darkness. Tomorrow I would meet with Robert Mitchell and learn the full extent of Thomas's final gift to me. Tonight, I would plan exactly how to handle my daughter's attempt to manage my life. Outside, an Oregon rain began to fall, the kind of gentle precipitation that had provided the soundtrack to our decades in Salem. Thomas had taught me to love these quiet storms, to find peace in their rhythm. This storm felt different. It felt like preparation. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Claire's voice was warm, solicitous. "Mom, I just wanted to check on you before bed. Derek found some information about Willowbrook Manor. It's supposed to be one of the finest senior communities in the Pacific Northwest. They have an opening next month, and they'd love to give us a tour this Saturday." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of Thomas's secrets and the sharp clarity of what lay ahead. "That's very thoughtful of you both." "Of course, Mom. We just want you to be safe and happy." After I hung up, I sat in the dark listening to the rain. Tomorrow I would discover exactly how much my freedom was worth. Tomorrow I would begin to understand the full scope of Thomas's gift and the true nature of my daughter's intentions. But tonight, for the first time since Thomas's death, I smiled. The storm was coming, but I was no longer defenseless against it. Robert Mitchell's law office occupied a restored Victorian mansion on State Street, the kind of building that had witnessed Salem's transformation from frontier town to cultural center. I climbed the oak staircase Thursday morning, my purse clutched tightly against my side, Thomas's documents secure in a leather portfolio. Robert greeted me with the same gentle professionalism he'd shown during Thomas's final months. At 58, he still projected the quiet authority that had made him Salem's most respected estate attorney. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but serious. "Eleanor, please sit down. Can I offer you tea?" "No, thank you." I settled into the wingback chair where I'd sat 6 months ago, while Thomas discussed his will. Then I'd been the supportive wife, letting my husband handle business while I worried about his declining health. Thomas left very specific instructions about this meeting, Robert began, opening a thick file. "He wanted to ensure you understood your complete financial picture before." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Before you had to make any decisions about your future." He spread documents across his mahogany desk like a poker hand that would determine my fate. Property deeds, investment statements, insurance policies, bank records, a financial landscape I'd never fully explored. "Your husband was a remarkable man, Eleanor. Not just in his devotion to you, but in his financial acumen. That modest professor's salary supported a very comfortable lifestyle, but Thomas was also building something much larger." The numbers Robert showed me were staggering. Thomas's private music students had included some of Oregon's wealthiest families, and he'd charged premium rates for his expertise. His compositions had been licensed for film soundtracks and commercial use, generating royalties I'd never known about. Most importantly, he'd invested every extra dollar with the patience and discipline of someone who understood compound interest. "Your liquid assets," Robert said quietly, "amount to approximately $1.3 million. Combined with the house and personal property, your total worth is just under $2.2 million. I stared at the documents, my practical teacher's mind struggling to process the reality. Thomas and I had lived comfortably, but simply. We'd shopped at discount stores, grown vegetables in our garden, driven the same cars for over a decade. I'd mended clothes and cooked at home, never realizing we could have afforded luxuries. "He wanted you to know," Robert continued, "that he kept your lifestyle modest by choice, not necessity. He believed in security, in having enough to weather any storm. He also believed," Robert hesitated, then pulled out another document. "He believed you might need to protect yourself." It was another letter, this one addressed to Robert. "Robert, by the time Margaret reads this, Claire will have begun pressuring her to surrender her independence. I've watched my daughter change over the past few years, influenced by Derek's materialism and her own growing sense of entitlement. They assume Margaret is helpless and poor. They are wrong on both counts. Eleanor spent 40 years managing classrooms of temperamental musicians, solving complex scheduling problems, and making difficult administrative decisions. She raised a daughter, managed a household, and supported my career when we had nothing but dreams. She is not fragile, she is not helpless, and she is not poor. Help her understand this. Help her protect herself. And if Claire challenges her decisions, remind her that family loyalty must be mutual. Thomas Sullivan. Eleanor, Robert said gently, Thomas asked me to help you with whatever decisions you make. But he was very clear that the decisions are yours alone. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the weight of Thomas's trust and the crystal clarity of my situation. What exactly did Claire tell you when she called yesterday? Robert's eyebrows rose. I'm sorry. Claire called you yesterday afternoon. I could tell from Derek's comments when they got home. What did she want? Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. She expressed concern about your ability to manage your finances alone. She asked about establishing a power of attorney arrangement. The words felt like a slap. Power of attorney, legal authority to make decisions for me. She seemed to think it would be in your best interest, given your recent loss and your... He paused. Her exact words were advanced age and inexperience with financial matters. I was 67 years old. I'd been balancing budgets and making decisions since before Claire was born. What did you tell her? I told her that would require your explicit consent and that I saw no reason why you couldn't continue managing your own affairs. I also told her that any such arrangement would need to be initiated by you, not by concerned family members. Robert leaned forward. Margaret, you're nowhere near needing that kind of protection. Your husband knew that. The question is, do you? I left Robert's office with a new understanding of my power and a crystal clear view of my daughter's intentions. Claire didn't want to help me manage my money. She wanted to manage my money. The senior living facility wasn't about my safety. It was about her control. The drive home took me past Willowbrook Manor, the place Claire and Derek wanted to tour on Saturday. It was an impressive facility, modern buildings set on manicured grounds with a circular drive lined with cherry trees. But it was also a container, a place where people went to wait for death while their families managed their assets. I pulled into the visitor parking lot and sat in my car, studying the building. Through the large windows, I could see residents in wheelchairs arranged around a television, their vacant expressions reflecting the afternoon light. Others moved slowly through the corridors with walkers, their steps careful and measured. These were not my people. This was not my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek, looking forward to Saturday's tour. They said they have a beautiful suite available on the 3rd floor with mountain views. I typed back, I'll be ready. But I wasn't looking forward to it. I was looking forward to what would come after. That evening, Claire and Derek arrived for dinner with an iPad loaded with information about senior living facilities. They'd expanded their search beyond Willowbrook Manor to include places in Portland, Eugene, even Seattle. The wonderful thing about these communities, Derek said, scrolling through photos of elegant dining rooms and activity centers, is that they handle everything. Meals, housekeeping, medical care, social activities. You'd never have to worry about anything again. Some worry keeps a person sharp, I said, serving the salmon and croûte I'd made from Thomas's mother's recipe. Mom, you've worried enough for one lifetime, Claire said. Dad would want you to relax, to enjoy your golden years. I wondered what Claire would say if she knew my golden years were worth $2.2 million. I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, I said carefully, now that your father's gone. I have the freedom to make some changes. Exactly. Derek's face lit up with enthusiasm. That's what's so wonderful about these communities. They have book clubs, art classes, group trips. You could learn pottery or take up watercolor painting. I was thinking about something more adventurous. Claire paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. Adventurous? Travel, maybe. Volunteer work. Your father and I always talked about seeing Europe, helping with music education programs in underserved communities. The silence that followed was telling. Claire and Derek exchanged one of their meaningful looks. Mom, Claire said slowly, that sounds wonderful in theory, but be realistic. You're not 30 anymore. International travel is expensive, and volunteer work can be demanding. I'm in excellent health. For now, Derek added. But what if something happened while you were in some remote location? What if you got sick in a foreign country? What if I got sick here in Salem? That's different. Here you have us. Here you have familiar doctors, people who know you. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their concerns. You make valid points. Maybe I should start smaller, volunteer locally, take some trips within the United States. That sounds much more reasonable, Claire said, relief evident in her voice. Of course, I'd need to sell the house first. Too much space for one person, and the maintenance costs are becoming significant. Another meaningful look passed between them. Actually, Mom, Derek said carefully, we've been talking about that too. The housing market is challenging right now. You might want to hold on to the house for a while. Maybe rent it out. Claire and I would be happy to manage that for you, Derek continued. Find reliable tenants, collect rent, handle any problems. It would give you a steady income stream while you're transitioning. Transitioning. Such a careful word for what they had planned. That's very generous of you both, I said. But I wouldn't want to burden you with that kind of responsibility. It's not a burden, Mom. We're family. Family. They kept using that word without understanding its meaning. After they left, I sat at my computer and began researching international volunteer organizations. Thomas had been right. I wasn't helpless. I'd managed a high school music department for 20 years, coordinating schedules for 5 different ensembles while teaching private lessons and directing community concerts. I'd organized international student exchange programs, managed complex budgets, and dealt with demanding parents and administrators. I was perfectly capable of managing my own life. The Doctors Without Borders website showed volunteer opportunities in 15 countries. UNESCO had programs for music educators in developing nations. The Peace Corps needed experienced teachers for adult education programs across Southeast Asia. I bookmarked a dozen opportunities and began filling out preliminary applications. If Claire and Derek wanted to play games with my future, I would show them exactly how high the stakes really were. My phone rang at 11 p.m. Claire's voice was casual, but I could hear the underlying tension. Mom, Derek had a thought. Maybe we should schedule that financial planning meeting we mentioned. You know, get a clear picture of your resources before you make any big decisions. What kind of big decisions? Well, you mentioned travel, volunteer work. Those things can be expensive, and we want to make sure you have enough money to last. I see. Robert Mitchell could probably recommend a good financial advisor, someone who specializes in retirement planning. I almost laughed. Claire had no idea that Robert Mitchell was already intimately familiar with my financial situation. That's thoughtful of you to be concerned about my future. Of course we're concerned. We love you, Mom. Love. Another word they used without understanding its meaning. I'll think about it, I said. Good. And Mom, maybe hold off on any major commitments until we get a better handle on things. You know, just to be safe. After I hung up, I pulled out Thomas's letter again, reading his words by the light of his desk lamp. You are not helpless. You never have been. Tomorrow I would call 3 of the organizations I'd researched. I would schedule interviews, submit applications, begin the process of reclaiming my life. But tonight I would plan exactly how to handle Saturday's tour of Willowbrook Manor. Claire and Derek were about to learn that their careful manipulation had one fatal flaw. They'd underestimated the woman they were trying to control. I pulled out a notepad and began writing questions. Not questions about amenities or meal plans, but questions about costs, about financial requirements, about what happened when residents could no longer afford the monthly fees. Questions that would reveal exactly what Claire and Derek really knew about my financial situation. Questions that would begin my education in the art of strategic revelation. Outside, the Oregon rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows. But this time I wasn't measuring the distance between lightning and thunder. This time I was the storm. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Pacific Northwest sunshine that makes even difficult conversations seem manageable. I dressed carefully for our tour of Willowbrook Manor, a navy blazer Thomas had always complimented, comfortable walking shoes, and the pearl earrings he'd given me for our silver anniversary. I wanted to look like exactly what Claire and Derek expected, a recently widowed woman in need of guidance. They arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. Claire looked polished in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Derek wore pressed slacks and a polo shirt, his silver hair perfectly styled. Their expressions carried that particular blend of determination and false cheer that people wear when they're about to do something unpleasant for someone's own good. "Mom, you look lovely," Claire said, kissing my cheek. "Ready for this?" "As ready as anyone can be to tour their potential future," I replied. The 20-minute drive to Willowbrook Manor gave me time to observe my daughter and son-in-law in their natural habitat. Derek provided a running commentary about the facility's amenities while Claire offered encouraging observations about the benefits of communal living. They'd clearly rehearsed this presentation. "The monthly fee includes everything," Claire was saying as we pulled into the tree-lined entrance. "Meals, housekeeping, activities, basic medical care. It's really quite reasonable when you consider what you'd spend maintaining the house." "How reasonable?" I asked. "About $4,500 a month," Derek said. "That sounds like a lot, but when you factor in your mortgage payment, utilities, food, maintenance." "I don't have a mortgage payment." Silence filled Derek's BMW. I could practically hear the mental calculations being revised. "Well, no," Derek said carefully, "but property taxes, insurance, upkeep, it all adds up." Inside Willowbrook Manor, we were greeted by a woman named Susan Walsh, the marketing director. She was perhaps 50, with carefully styled brown hair and the kind of professional warmth that comes from years of convincing families to make difficult decisions. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm so pleased to meet you. Claire and Derek have told me wonderful things about you." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way her eyes quickly assessed me: health, mobility, cognitive function. I'd seen that same evaluating look in parents' eyes when they met me as their child's music teacher. "Thank you for accommodating us on short notice," I said. "Of course. Let me show you around. I think you'll be impressed with what we offer." The tour began in the main lobby, an elegant space with comfortable seating areas, a grand piano, and large windows overlooking the gardens. Residents moved through the space at the measured pace of people with nowhere urgent to go. Some used walkers, others moved independently, but all shared that particular careful gait of people conscious of their fragility. "We have 200 residents," Susan explained as we walked. "Independent living, assisted living, and memory care, all on one campus. It means you never have to move again, no matter how your needs change." "That's reassuring," I said, watching Claire nod approvingly. We visited the dining room where lunch was being served. The food looked institutional but adequate: herb-crusted chicken, rice pilaf, steamed vegetables. The residents ate quietly, some alone, others in small groups. A few needed assistance from staff members who moved efficiently between tables. 3 meals a day, Susan noted, plus snacks available around the clock. Our culinary staff can accommodate most dietary restrictions and preferences. "What about people who enjoy cooking for themselves?" I asked. "Each apartment has a small kitchenette, but honestly, most residents find it's easier to just enjoy the freedom from meal planning." Derek squeezed my arm. "Imagine never having to grocery shop or cook unless you want to. You could spend your time on things you actually enjoy." We toured the activity rooms, a library with large print books and jigsaw puzzles, an art studio where residents painted watercolor landscapes, a music room with an old spinet piano that desperately needed tuning. In the recreation room, a group was playing bingo with prizes of travel-sized toiletries. "We have a very active social calendar," Susan said. "Exercise classes, guest speakers, day trips to local attractions. There's always something happening." I watched the bingo players for a moment, noting their concentration on the simple game, their excitement over winning hand lotion and lip balm. These were people who had once conducted businesses, raised families, made complex decisions. Now they competed for drugstore samples. "It looks very organized," I said. "We find structure helps our residents feel secure," Susan replied. The apartment they showed us was on the third floor, just as Derek had mentioned. It was pleasant enough, a sitting area, a bedroom with an adjustable bed, a kitchenette with a microwave and mini refrigerator, a bathroom with grab bars, and a walk-in shower. "This would be perfect for you, Mom," Claire said, standing in the middle of the main room. "Look at that view of the mountains." Through the window, I could see the Cascade Range in the distance, the peaks snow-capped and majestic. It was beautiful in the way a postcard is beautiful, designed to be pleasing without requiring any effort or involvement. "How much personal furniture can residents bring?" I asked. "That's a great question," Susan said. "We encourage residents to bring personal items that make them feel at home, a favorite chair, family photos, small decorative pieces. But the apartments come fully furnished with the essentials, so there's no need to move heavy furniture." "What happens to the furniture that doesn't fit?" Another brief pause. Susan glanced at Claire and Derek. "Families usually handle that," she said diplomatically. "Storage, donations, sales, whatever works best." I nodded thoughtfully, picturing 35 years of memories being sorted into piles of keep, donate, and discard. "And what about residents who want to travel?" I asked. "Visit family, take vacations?" "We're very flexible about short trips," Susan assured me. "We just ask for advance notice so we can adjust meal planning and activities." "What about longer trips? A month or two?" Susan's smile became a bit fixed. "We have to discuss that case by case. The monthly fee continues regardless, of course, and we'd need to ensure your apartment remained available. So, I'd pay $4,500 a month even if I wasn't here?" "Think of it as maintaining your home base," Claire interjected quickly. "You'd have the security of knowing you always had a place to come back to." After the tour, we sat in Susan's office to discuss practical matters. She had prepared a folder with information about costs, services, and admission procedures. "The basic monthly fee is $4,200, she explained, "but that can vary depending on the level of care needed. If you require assistance with medications, personal care, or have medical needs that require additional attention, there are supplemental charges." "What's the maximum monthly cost?" I asked. "For memory care, it can reach $7,200 per month. But that's for residents who need comprehensive assistance." Claire leaned forward. "What kind of financial documentation do you require?" "We need to verify that potential residents can afford at least 2 years of care in advance," Susan said. "Bank statements, investment portfolios, property valuations. We also require a conversation with family members to ensure everyone understands the financial commitment." I watched Claire's face carefully. 2 years in advance, so for the basic level, that would be about $100,000. "It sounds like a lot," Susan said smoothly, "but we find it protects both the resident and the facility. No one wants to worry about running out of money." Derek cleared his throat. "And if someone's resources were limited, are there programs to help with costs?" "Medicaid can cover some expenses, but there's usually a waiting list for those beds, and the accommodations are more basic." I could see the calculations running behind Derek's eyes. If I had the $50,000 they thought I had, I could afford exactly 1 year at Willowbrook Manor. After that, I'd be dependent on their generosity or Medicaid. "Well," I said, standing up, "this has been very informative. Thank you for your time, Susan." "Of course. Do you have any other questions?" "Just one. What percentage of your residents are here because they chose to be, and what percentage are here because their families thought it was best?" Susan's professional smile wavered slightly. Well, I'd say most of our residents appreciate the security and community we provide." "That's not what I asked." The drive home was quiet. Claire and Derek seemed lost in their own thoughts, no doubt recalculating their timeline based on what they'd learned about Willowbrook Manor's costs. I sat in the back seat, watching Salem's familiar streets pass by, feeling the weight of Thomas's secrets and the sharp clarity of what I needed to do next. "So," Claire said finally, "what did you think?" "It's very nice," I said neutrally. "I can see why people would find it appealing." "The staff seems wonderful," Derek added. "Very attentive." "Yes, they do seem to take good care of their residents." We pulled into my driveway, and I gathered my purse and the folder Susan had given me. Would you like us to come in?
Claire asked.
We could discuss the financial aspects, maybe start planning. I think I need some time to process everything, I said. It's a big decision. Of course, Derek said quickly. Take all the time you need. We just want you to feel secure. After they left, I sat in Thomas's study, surrounded by his books and papers. The folder from Willowbrook Manor lay on his desk next to the documents Robert Mitchell had given me. The contrast was striking, one set of papers designed to limit my options, the other revealing the full scope of my freedom. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Dr. Sarah Chun at UNESCO. I'd found her contact information on their volunteer website. She coordinated music education programs in Southeast Asia. Dear Dr. Chun, I am a recently retired music educator with 40 years of experience teaching high school students. I have a master's degree in music education and extensive experience with choral conducting, instrumental music, and music theory. I am 67 years old, recently widowed, and looking for meaningful volunteer work that would allow me to use my skills to help underserved communities. I am particularly interested in your programs in Vietnam and Cambodia. I am in excellent health, financially independent, and available for long-term assignments. I have no family obligations that would prevent me from committing to overseas service. Please let me know if you have any opportunities that might be appropriate for someone with my background and availability. Sincerely, Eleanor Sullivan. I sent the email and began composing others, to Doctors Without Borders, to Habitat for Humanity, to the Peace Corps. Each email was a small act of rebellion, a declaration of independence from the life Claire and Derek had planned for me. My phone rang at 8 p.m. Claire's voice was carefully casual. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation in the car. You seemed, I don't know, a little overwhelmed by all the information. It's a lot to consider. It is. That's why Derek and I thought it might be helpful to set up that financial planning meeting we discussed, just to get a clear picture of your resources before you make any decisions. What kind of decisions? Well, Willowbrook Manor, or if you decide to stay in the house, we'd need to look at your budget for maintenance and care as you get older. I could hear Derek's voice in the background, feeding her lines. Mom, are you there? I'm here. I'm just thinking. Maybe we could meet with Robert Mitchell next week? Get everything laid out clearly? That's an interesting idea, Claire. Yes, let's do that. Let's definitely meet with Robert Mitchell and get everything laid out clearly. There was something in my tone that made Claire pause. Good. That's great, Mom. I'll call his office Monday. You do that. After I hung up, I pulled out Thomas's letter one more time. They assume you are helpless and poor. They are wrong on both counts. Monday was going to be very interesting indeed. The week passed slowly, filled with phone calls from Claire about scheduling the meeting with Robert Mitchell and gentle pressure from Derek about making decisions about my future. I deflected their urgency with vague promises to consider my options while privately making plans that would have shocked them. Dr. Chun from UNESCO had responded enthusiastically to my email, inviting me to a video interview for a position coordinating music education programs in rural Vietnam. Doctors Without Borders had expressed interest in my administrative skills for their field operations. The Peace Corps wanted to discuss opportunities in Cambodia and Laos. Each response felt like a door opening, revealing possibilities I'd never imagined at 67. While Claire and Derek plotted to contain my life within the safe boundaries of Willowbrook Manor, I was planning to expand it across continents. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Oregon sunshine that made even the most daunting conversations seem manageable. Robert Mitchell's conference room felt different this time, less like a place where my future was being decided for me, and more like a command center where I would take control. Claire and Derek arrived precisely on time, both dressed in their most conservative business attire. Claire carried a leather portfolio thick with documents she'd prepared, while Derek brought his tablet loaded with financial planning software. They looked like generals arriving for a strategic planning session, confident in their superior knowledge and preparation. I was already seated at the polished conference table when they entered, having arrived 30 minutes early to brief Robert on exactly how I wanted this meeting to proceed. The documents spread before me told a story Claire and Derek had never imagined, the true story of their inheritance expectations versus reality. "Mom," Claire said, settling into her chair with the efficiency of someone accustomed to controlling meetings. "I'm so glad we're finally doing this. It's important that we all understand the financial picture clearly." "I couldn't agree more," I replied, noting how she'd positioned herself at the head of the table, with Derek flanking her like a supportive advisor. They'd choreographed this intervention carefully. Robert entered the room carrying a thick file, his expression professionally neutral. "Good morning, everyone. Claire, Derek, thank you for coming." Eleanor asked me to prepare a comprehensive overview of her financial situation so we could address any questions or concerns. Derek leaned forward eagerly. "That's exactly what we need. We want to make sure Mom has enough resources to last and that she's making informed decisions about her future care." "Before we begin," Claire added, pulling out her own documents, "Derek and I prepared some research on elder care costs, investment strategies for fixed incomes, and long-term care insurance options. We want to make sure Mom understands all her choices." Robert glanced at me, and I gave him the slightest nod. "Time to begin." "That's very thoughtful," Robert said. "However, before we discuss strategies for managing limited resources, I think you should understand the actual scope of Eleanor's assets." He opened his file and began distributing copies of financial statements. I watched Claire's face as she scanned the first page: bank balances, investment accounts, property valuations. Her professional composure began to crack as the numbers registered. "This can't be right," Derek said, his voice strained. "This shows liquid assets of over $1 million. $1.3 million in readily accessible funds," Robert confirmed. "Plus the house, which is valued at $850,000 and fully paid off. Thomas also left Eleanor his vintage Jaguar, which is worth approximately $90,000. Claire stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. But Dad was just a music professor. We lived modestly. I mean, this is..." "Your father was indeed a music professor," Robert said calmly. "He was also a successful private instructor, a composer whose work generated significant royalties, and a very shrewd investor who spent 40 years building financial security for your mother." "You knew about this?" Derek asked me directly, his carefully controlled demeanor beginning to slip. "I learned about it after your father died," I said evenly. "He wanted me to understand my options before making any decisions about my future." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see the mental calculations running behind their eyes, the revision of assumptions, the crumbling of carefully laid plans, the dawning realization that their wealthy mother didn't need their management after all. "Why didn't you tell us?" Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell you what, exactly?" That you had." She gestured helplessly at the financial statements. "That I was financially independent? That I had resources? Would it have changed anything?" Another pause, longer this time. Derek cleared his throat. "Of course it would have changed things. We wouldn't have been so worried about your financial security. We could have discussed different options for your future." "What kind of different options?" Claire and Derek exchanged a look I'd seen 1,000 times, the silent communication of a couple who'd been caught off guard and needed to regroup. "Well," Claire said carefully, "with this kind of financial freedom, you could afford in-home care if you wanted to stay in the house. You could hire help for maintenance, housekeeping, medical needs. You could travel," Derek added quickly. "Take those trips you mentioned. See Europe, do some volunteer work." I leaned back in my chair, studying their faces. "Interesting. Last week, when you thought I had limited resources, international travel and volunteer work were dangerous and irresponsible. Now that you know I can afford them, they've become reasonable options." "That's not..." "We were just being cautious," Claire protested. "Cautious about what? My safety or your inheritance?" The words hung in the air, like an accusation. Claire's face flushed red, while Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's unfair, Mom," Claire said. "We were trying to help you." "Help me with what, specifically?" "Help you make responsible decisions about your future." without asking what I wanted, without considering what would make me happy, without even finding out what resources I actually had to work with. Robert cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should discuss Eleanor's actual plans for her future, now that everyone understands the financial picture. I smiled, feeling the weight of Thomas's secrets finally lifting from my shoulders. Thank you, Robert. I do have some plans I'd like to share. I pulled out my own folder, the one I'd been building all week while Claire and Derek plotted my containment. I've been accepted for a volunteer position with UNESCO, coordinating music education programs in rural Vietnam. It's a 6-month assignment, with the possibility of extension. Claire's mouth fell open. Vietnam? I've also been offered a position with Doctors Without Borders, managing logistics for mobile medical clinics in Cambodia. And the Peace Corps wants to interview me for their adult education programs in Laos. Derek stared at me as if I'd announced plans to join the circus. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I'm 67 years old. I'm in excellent health. I'm financially independent, and I have skills that are needed in places where they can make a real difference. But what about us? Claire's voice was small, uncertain. What about your family? What about you? We need you here. We're planning to start a family, and we hoped. I waited for her to finish the sentence, but she seemed unable to voice what she'd been thinking. You hoped what, Claire? Derek took over when she faltered. We hoped you'd be part of our children's lives. We hoped you'd want to be a grandmother who is present, involved. The way you've been present and involved in my life since your father died? Another uncomfortable silence. Claire, I said gently, in the 3 weeks since your father's funeral, how many times have you asked me what I wanted to do with my life? How many times have you asked about my dreams, my interests, my plans? We asked about your future. You asked about my care. You asked about my safety. You asked about my financial management. You never once asked what would make me happy. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking State Street, watching Salem go about its daily business, while my family grappled with the collapse of their assumptions. I raised you, Claire. I supported your education, celebrated your achievements, and helped you become the successful woman you are today. Your father and I gave you every advantage we could afford, and some we couldn't. I turned back to face them. But at no point did we treat you like a problem to be managed or an asset to be protected. We respected your autonomy, supported your choices, and trusted you to make good decisions. We were trying to do the same for you, Derek protested. No, you weren't. You were trying to make decisions for me. There's a significant difference. Robert shuffled the papers in front of him. Eleanor, would you like to discuss the practical aspects of your international volunteer work? There are tax implications, healthcare considerations, estate planning updates we should address. Thank you, Robert. But first, I want to make sure Claire and Derek understand something important. I returned to my seat and looked directly at my daughter. I love you, Claire. I will always love you. But I won't allow you to limit my life because it makes you more comfortable. We weren't trying to limit your life. Weren't you? When I mentioned wanting to travel and volunteer overseas, what was your immediate response? Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. We said it was dangerous. And when you thought I couldn't afford to maintain this house independently, what did you suggest? That you move to Willowbrook Manor, where you could visit me on weekends and take me out for dinner, where staff would handle my daily care and I wouldn't be your responsibility anymore. Derek leaned forward, his face earnest. Eleanor, you have to understand our perspective. We love you, and the thought of something happening to you while you're alone, especially in some foreign country. Something could happen to me while I'm alone in Salem, I interrupted. Something could happen to me at Willowbrook Manor. Something could happen to you while you're driving home from work tonight. Fear of what might happen is not a valid reason to avoid living. I pulled out the last document from my folder, a letter I'd written the night before. This is a copy of the letter I'm sending to both your offices. In it, I formally request that you not contact my doctors, my lawyer, my financial advisor, or any care facilities on my behalf. I am of sound mind. I am capable of making my own decisions, and I do not want or need your intervention in my personal affairs. Claire's face went white. Mom, you can't. I can and I have. Any attempt to establish a conservatorship, power of attorney, or any other legal mechanism to control my life will be met with vigorous legal resistance. We would never. You already tried, Claire. You called Robert asking about power of attorney arrangements. You've been researching senior living facilities and making appointments without consulting me about what I actually wanted. The meeting continued for another hour, with Robert explaining the legal and financial mechanisms I'd put in place to protect my independence. Claire and Derek asked questions, made suggestions, and gradually began to understand that their role in my life had fundamentally changed. As we prepared to leave, Claire approached me hesitantly. Mom, I want you to know that if we handled this wrong, it's because we love you. The thought of losing you, especially so soon after losing Dad. I reached out and touched her hand. Sweetheart, you're not losing me, but you are losing control over me. There's a difference. What if something happens to you while you're overseas? What if you get sick, or hurt, or... Then I'll deal with it the same way I've dealt with every challenge in my life, with intelligence, resourcefulness, and courage. The same way you'll deal with the challenges in your life. Derek stepped forward. Eleanor, we want to support you in whatever you decide to do. We may not understand it, we may worry about it, but we want to be part of your life. Then be part of it. Don't try to control it. That evening, I sat in Thomas's study, writing in the journal I'd started keeping since his death. The house felt different now, not empty, but full of possibility. Tomorrow, I would begin the final preparations for my new life. Tonight, I would savor the victory of reclaiming my freedom. May 15th. Today I told Claire and Derek the truth about my financial situation and my plans for the future. Their reaction was exactly what Thomas predicted: shock, confusion, and then a scrambling attempt to revise their approach. I don't think they're fundamentally bad people. I think they genuinely believed they were helping me. But they made the classic mistake of confusing love with control, of assuming that caring for someone means making decisions for them. Dr. Chin from UNESCO called this afternoon to finalize the details of my assignment in Vietnam. I'll be leaving in 6 weeks to spend 6 months in rural villages, working with local teachers to develop music education programs. At 67, I'm about to have the adventure I've been dreaming of since I was 20. Thomas would be proud. He would also be laughing at the irony. The man who lived so carefully, so conservatively, who planned for every contingency, left me the freedom to live wildly. Claire called tonight to ask if we could have dinner tomorrow. She sounded different, uncertain, maybe a little hurt, but also curious. I think this might be the beginning of a real relationship between us, one based on mutual respect rather than assumed dependency. Or maybe she's still trying to find a way to control the situation. Time will tell. What I know for certain is that I'm no longer the grieving widow who stood in this study 3 weeks ago, overwhelmed by secrets and afraid of the future. I'm Eleanor Sullivan, and I'm about to find out who I really am when nobody else is making decisions for me. 3 months later, I stood in a dusty schoolyard in rural Vietnam, watching 30 children sing a Vietnamese folk song I'd taught them using techniques I developed over 40 years of music education. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and green, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and the sounds of a village beginning its daily routines. My hands were stained with chalk dust, my clothes were practical cotton that could be washed in the village well, and my silver hair was tied back with a headband one of the children had woven for me. I had never felt more purposeful, more alive, more myself. The WhatsApp notification on my phone buzzed insistently. Another message from Claire, the 5th this week. Mom, Derek and I have been talking. We were wrong about everything. We're proud of what you're doing. When you come home, we want to hear all about it. Also,
I'm pregnant.
We're going to need your advice. I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket without responding immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that Claire faced the actual challenges of parenthood, suddenly, she wanted the guidance of the woman she'd been so eager to warehouse 3 months ago.
Cô Eleno,
Called Lynn, my 10-year-old translator and self-appointed assistant. The village leader wants to know if you can teach the evening music class for the adults too. Tell him yes, I said in my slowly improving Vietnamese. Music is for everyone. That evening, I sat on the porch of the small house the village had provided for me, typing on my laptop. The internet connection was sporadic, but I managed to send my weekly blog post to the website I'd started, Late Blooms, One Woman's Guide to Starting Over After 60. Week 12 in Vietnam. Today, I taught 30 children to harmonize a song about the changing seasons. Tomorrow, I'll teach their parents the same song because music belongs to families, not just individuals. Some of you have written to ask if I miss home, if I regret leaving the comfortable life I had in Oregon. The answer is complicated. I miss Thomas every day. I miss the garden we planted together, the morning tea routine we shared for 40 years, the quiet conversations about books and music that filled our evenings. But I don't miss the woman I was becoming in those weeks after his death, the widow who let other people's fears define her future, who confused safety with surrender, who was willing to trade adventure for security. At 67, I'm stronger than I was at 40. I'm more confident than I was at 50. I'm more purposeful than I was at any point in my previous life. Age is not a prison sentence. Widowhood is not a surrender flag. Family love should not come with strings attached. Next month, I'll move to my new assignment in Cambodia, where I'll be working with Doctors Without Borders to coordinate educational programs in refugee camps. It's challenging work, but it's work that matters. To those of you considering your own late-life adventures, trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Trust your right to live fully until the very end. The people who truly love you will support your choices, even if those choices scare them. The people who don't, well, their opinions matter less than you think. From Vietnam, with love and gratitude. Eleanor. I posted the blog entry and opened Claire's messages. Along with the pregnancy announcement, she'd sent photos of the ultrasound, updates about her doctor's appointments, and questions about everything from prenatal vitamins to nursery furniture. Reading between the lines, I could see what was happening. Faced with the reality of becoming responsible for another human being, Claire was beginning to understand the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. She was learning what I'd tried to teach her 3 months ago, that love means supporting someone's growth, not limiting their possibilities. I started typing a response. Dearest Claire, congratulations on your pregnancy. I'm thrilled about becoming a grandmother and honored that you want my advice. I'll be finishing my assignment here in Cambodia next spring, and I'd love to be home before the baby arrives. There's so much I want to share with you about this incredible experience. You asked about my advice for new parents. Here's the most important thing I've learned. The greatest gift you can give your children is not your protection, it's your example. Show them how to live courageously. Show them how to recover from setbacks. Show them how to pursue their dreams even when those dreams scare other people. And remember, someday your child will be an adult with their own dreams and plans. When that day comes, I hope you'll remember this conversation and choose to support their autonomy rather than trying to manage their choices. I love you, and I can't wait to meet my grandchild. From Cambodia, with excitement and anticipation.
Mom.
I send the message and close my laptop. Tomorrow, I would begin training local staff to continue the music education programs after I left. Next week, I would fly to Phnom Penh to begin my new assignment with Doctors Without Borders. At 67, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined a year ago. Thomas's greatest gift hadn't been the money. It had been the courage to use that money to become who I was meant to be. 6 months later, I stood in the arrivals terminal at Portland International Airport, scanning the crowd for Claire and Derek. My backpack was worn from months of travel. My skin was tanned from working in the Cambodian sun, and my eyes held the confidence that comes from discovering you're capable of far more than you ever imagined. Claire spotted me first, rushing forward with tears in her eyes. She was visibly pregnant now, her face glowing with the particular radiance of early motherhood. Derek followed close behind, his expression a mixture of relief and genuine admiration. "Mom," Claire said, embracing me tightly. You look amazing." "I feel amazing," I replied, noting how different this homecoming felt from the tentative dynamic we'd had before I left. During the drive home, they pepper me with questions about my experiences, my work, the people I'd met, and the places I'd seen. But underneath their curiosity, I could sense something else: respect. They were no longer talking to the grieving widow they'd tried to manage. They were talking to a woman who'd proven she could take care of herself anywhere in the world. "We have something to show you," Derek said as we pulled into my driveway. The house looked exactly as I'd left it. Robert Mitchell had arranged for maintenance and upkeep while I was away. But there was something new, a small sign in the front garden that read Eleanor's Haven in elegant script. "We thought," Claire said hesitantly, "that when you're home between assignments, you should have a name for your base of operations." I laughed, recognizing the careful wording. Not when you come home to stay, but when you're home between assignments. They were finally beginning to understand. That evening, we sat in my living room sharing tea and photo albums from my travels. Claire asked thoughtful questions about the children I'd taught, the medical programs I'd helped coordinate, the challenges and rewards of international volunteer work. "Mom," she said finally, settling her hands on her growing belly, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For trying to make you smaller. For assuming you needed to be protected instead of supported. For thinking I knew what was best for you without ever asking what you wanted." I reached over and covered her hand with mine. "You were scared, sweetheart. Fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do." "I was scared," she agreed. "But I was also selfish. I wanted you to be available when I needed you, the way you always had been. I wanted you to fit into my timeline, my plans." Derek leaned forward. We both did. "And we're sorry." "The thing is," Claire continued, "watching you these past months, following your blog, seeing the photos of you working with those children, I realized I want my child to have a grandmother who shows them that life is an adventure, not something to be afraid of." "I want that too," I said. "But I also want you to know that being a grandmother doesn't mean giving up being Eleanor. I'm planning to continue my international work, maybe on a more flexible schedule, but I'm not ready to retire from living."
"We know," Derek said.
"And we want to support that. We want our child to grow up knowing that dreams don't have expiration dates." 6 months later, I held my granddaughter Sarah for the first time, marveling at the perfect tiny fingers and the way she studied my face with serious dark eyes. Claire had requested that I be present for the birth, not as a caretaker but as family, as someone whose strength and independence she wanted to celebrate rather than manage. "She's going to have quite an example to follow," the nurse said, noting the photos Claire had brought of my volunteer work overseas. "That's the idea," Claire replied, smiling at me over the baby's head. As I rocked Sarah in the hospital room, I thought about the letter Thomas had left me, about the warnings and predictions that had proven so accurate. But I also thought about what he couldn't have predicted, that the daughter who tried to limit my life would eventually become my greatest champion. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Claire asked. "I'm thinking about circles," I said. "How the love we show our children comes back to us in ways we never expect." "Are you planning any new assignments?" Derek asked. "Sarah's going to need stories from Grandma Eleanor's adventures." I smiled, feeling the weight of possibilities stretching before me. UNESCO wants me to develop a music therapy program for refugees in Jordan. Doctors Without Borders has offered me a coordination role in their Lebanon operations. And there's a new program in Costa Rica that combines education with environmental conservation. "When would you leave?" Claire asked, but there was no anxiety in her voice now. Only curiosity and support. "Not for at least 6 months. I want to be here while you're settling into parenthood. But yes, I'm planning to continue working as long as I'm able." "Good," Claire said firmly. "Sarah's going to need to know that her grandmother is a woman who makes a difference in the world." That evening, alone in my house for the first time in months, I sat in Thomas's study and opened my journal. October 20th. Today I became a grandmother. Sarah Eleanor Sullivan Martinez arrived at 3:47 p.m., weighing 7 pounds and 12 ounces, and immediately began changing everyone's definition of family. Claire has become the woman I always hoped she'd be, strong, supportive, and secure enough in herself to celebrate other people's adventures rather than trying to contain them. Thomas would be amazed by how this story has unfolded. The man who planned for every contingency couldn't have planned for this, his careful financial preparations becoming the foundation for a life neither of us could have imagined. I'm 70 years old now, and I'm finally beginning to understand what he meant when he said I wasn't helpless. He wasn't just talking about money or legal protection. He was talking about the power to redefine what it means to age, to be widowed, to be a mother and grandmother in the modern world. Next spring I'll go to Jordan, where I'll spend 6 months developing music therapy programs for children who've lost everything except their voices. It will be my 10th international assignment, and I suspect it won't be my last. Some people measure their lives in years. I'm learning to measure mine in transformations. The children who discover they can sing, the young teachers who learn they can inspire, the families who find healing through music. And sometimes, the daughters who learn that true love means letting go of control and embracing trust. From Oregon with peace and purpose. Eleanor. I closed the journal and looked around Thomas's study. My study now. The books were the same, the furniture unchanged, but the room felt different. It was no longer a shrine to the past, but a launching pad for the future. Tomorrow, I would start planning my next adventure. Tonight, I would savor the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed, a family restored, and a future bright with possibility. The phone rang. Claire, probably wanting to share some detail about Sarah's first evening at home. I answered with a smile, ready to discuss whatever concern or joy my daughter wanted to share, secure in the knowledge that our relationship was now built on respect rather than control. Mom. Claire's voice was warm with exhaustion and happiness. I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For showing me what courage looks like. For proving that it's never too late to start over. For being exactly the grandmother Sarah needs, someone who refuses to be contained by other people's expectations. I looked out the window at the Oregon evening, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Thank you for learning how to let me go so I could become who I was meant to be. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of my neighborhood settling into evening. This house would always be my home base, but it was no longer my limitation. It was simply one of many places where Eleanor Sullivan belonged. At 70, I had learned the most important lesson of my life. The greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the courage to live authentically, the wisdom to reject other people's limitations, and the grace to transform loss into liberation. Thomas had given me the tools for freedom. I had chosen to use them. And the story was far from over. 2 years later, I stood in a refugee camp outside Amman, Jordan, holding a small keyboard while 30 children sat cross-legged on worn rugs, their eyes bright with anticipation. Behind them, their mothers watched from the shadows of makeshift shelters, some smiling for the first time in months as their children discovered the universal language of music. Today we learn a song from her country, I said in Arabic, the language I'd been studying intensively for 6 months before this assignment. But we will sing it together, like a family. Amara, a 7-year-old girl who'd lost her voice to trauma when her family fled Syria, stood quietly at the back of the group. For 3 weeks, she'd attended every session without making a sound. Today, as I played the opening notes of a simple melody, I saw her lips move slightly. The other children began to sing, their voices creating harmonies that rose above the dust and desperation of camp life. And then, barely audible at first, I heard it, Amara's voice joining theirs, fragile but true. Her mother, Fatima, gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, I understood why I was here, why Thomas's gift had led me to this dusty corner of the world where hope seemed impossible, but healing still happened. After the session, Dr. James Morrison, the MSF, Medicine Sans Frontieres, coordinator, approached me with his usual exhausted smile. Eleanor, the psychological impact of your program is remarkable. The children who participate show measurably reduced anxiety and improved social integration. Music doesn't require perfect language skills, I replied, packing my keyboard carefully. It doesn't care about your passport or your legal status. It just asks you to breathe and let something beautiful come out. That evening, I sat in my small prefab shelter, video calling Claire and Derek via satellite internet. Sarah, now 2.5, pressed her face close to the screen, her dark hair in pigtails and her smile infectious. Gigi Eleanor, she squealed, using the nickname she'd created for me. Sing the happy song. I launched into a silly tune I'd made up during my last visit home, watching Sarah dance around the living room while Claire and Derek looked on with patient amusement. How are you feeling about coming home next month? Claire asked when Sarah had wandered off to play with her toys. Ready, I admitted. This assignment has been intense. But good intense. We have news, Derek said, exchanging a meaningful look with Claire. Oh. Claire turned the laptop toward her belly, which was noticeably rounded again. Baby number 2, arriving in November. I felt a familiar surge of joy mixed with fierce protectiveness. Congratulations. How are you feeling? Tired, but good. And Eleanor. Claire paused, choosing her words carefully. We want you to know that we're not expecting you to change your schedule. We've learned from our mistakes with Sarah. We want you to be grandma, but we also want you to be you. Although, Derek added with a grin, if you happen to be between assignments when this one arrives, Sarah would love to have her Gigi Eleanor around for the big sister transition. I smiled, touched by how far we'd all come. I'll check my calendar. UNESCO has offered me a position developing music therapy protocols for their education division. It would be based in Paris with field assignments throughout Africa and the Middle East. Paris? Claire's eyes lit up. Sarah's going to demand we visit. I'm counting on it. After we hung up, I walked to the edge of the camp, where the lights of Amman twinkled in the distance. The desert air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and the faint sounds of evening prayers from the nearby mosque. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen at UNESCO. Eleanor, the board approved your proposal for the Paris position. We'd like you to start in January. Will that work with your family obligations? I typed back. Perfect timing. I'll have November and December to help my daughter adjust to 2 children, then I can begin the new role in January. For 3 years now, I'd been proving that you could be a devoted grandmother and an independent woman simultaneously. The key was communication, boundaries, and family members who understood that love doesn't require geographical proximity. My blog had evolved too, attracting readers from around the world who were navigating their own late-life transitions. Tonight's post would be about Amara's breakthrough, about the power of patience and the miracle of small victories. Week 23 in Jordan. Today, a traumatized child found her voice again through music. Tomorrow, 30 more children will discover that they can create beauty even in the midst of chaos. I'm often asked why I continue this work at 70, why I don't settle down and enjoy a comfortable retirement surrounded by family. The answer is simple. This is comfortable. This is settling into who I was always meant to be. Next month, I'll return to Oregon for 2 months with my family. In January, I'll begin a new role based in Paris, developing music therapy programs for UNESCO's Global Education Initiative. At 70, I'm not winding down. I'm leveling up. Some people fear aging because they think it means becoming smaller, more limited, more dependent. I've learned the opposite is true. Age can be expansion if you let it. Experience can be liberation if you use it wisely. The woman who stood in her husband's study 3 years ago, paralyzed by grief and overwhelmed by other people's expectations, couldn't have imagined this life. That woman thought her adventure was over. She was wrong. It was just beginning. From Jordan, with gratitude and determination, Eleanor. 3 months later, I sat in Claire's living room, watching Sarah carefully feed her baby brother James while I provided musical encouragement on my travel guitar. Claire rested on the couch, looking exhausted but radiant in the way of mothers who found their rhythm. The song works, she observed, noting how James relaxed when I played the lullaby I'd composed for him. You've turned my children into music therapy case studies. All children respond to music, I said, transitioning to a simple melody that made Sarah giggle. I just happen to know which rhythms calm babies and which ones make toddlers dance. Derek emerged from the kitchen with tea, moving with the efficient grace of a man who'd learned to navigate life with two small children. Eleanor, we got the invitation to your UNESCO reception. Are you sure you want us to come to Paris for your orientation week? I'm sure. I want Sarah to see where Gigi Eleanor works. I want her to understand that grandmothers can have important jobs in beautiful places. What if she decides she wants to be a globe-trotting humanitarian instead of staying close to home? Claire asked with mock concern. Then you'll support her dreams the way you've learned to support mine, I replied. And you'll trust that good parenting gives children roots strong enough to let them grow wings. Sarah looked up from her careful ministrations to her brother. Gigi Eleanor, will you teach me songs in Paris? I'll teach you songs from all over the world, I promised. And when you're older, maybe you can come visit me at work. Really? Really. But for now, you have the very important job of being the best big sister in Oregon. That evening, after Derek and Claire had retreated upstairs with their children, I sat in their living room updating my will with Robert Mitchell via video call. The UNESCO position comes with excellent benefits, I explained, including life insurance and a pension. I want to make sure everything is properly structured. Your estate planning has become quite complex, Robert observed with amusement. International banking, multi-currency accounts, property in multiple countries. Thomas would be amazed. Thomas would be proud, I corrected. He gave me the foundation. I built the life. Speaking of which, have you given any thought to what you want to do with the Salem house long-term? You're rarely there anymore. I've been considering this question for months. The house held 40 years of memories, but it had also become more of a storage facility than a home. I'm thinking of donating it to a nonprofit that provides temporary housing for families of hospitalized children. Keep it in Salem, keep it useful, but let it serve people who need it more than I do. That's very generous. It's practical. I don't need a 3,000 square foot house as a part-time residence. And Thomas would like the idea of our home helping other families through difficult times. After we finished the call, I walked onto Claire's back deck, looking up at the Oregon stars I'd grown up under. In 2 weeks, I'd fly to Paris to begin the next chapter of my adventure. In 5 years, I'd be 75, possibly ready to scale back my international work, but certainly not ready to stop contributing. The old Eleanor, the one who'd been so easily manipulated by other people's fears, seemed like someone I'd known in a previous lifetime. That woman had been afraid of uncertainty, dependent on other people's approval, limited by other people's expectations. This Eleanor thrived on uncertainty, trusted her own judgment, and defined her own limitations. My phone buzzed with a message from Amara's mother in Jordan. Miss Eleanor, Amara started school this week. She sings your songs every day. Thank you for giving her back her voice. I smiled, typing back. Tell Amara I carry her song with me everywhere I go. This was the real inheritance Thomas had left me, not just money, but the freedom to discover that my life's most meaningful work had been waiting for me on the other side of fear. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my apartment in the 7th arrondissement of Paris, watching the Eiffel Tower light up against the evening sky. My UNESCO office was a 15-minute walk away, my local cafe knew my order, and I developed a routine that included early morning runs along the Seine and evening conversations with my neighbors. At 71, I was living in Paris, managing education programs across 3 continents, and planning my next field assignment to Ghana. The woman who'd been afraid to leave her house in Salem was now navigating international bureaucracy, coordinating with government officials, and developing policy that would affect thousands of children. Claire and Derek had visited twice, bringing Sarah and James to see the City of Light through their grandmother's eyes. Sarah had insisted on visiting UNESCO headquarters, where she'd announced to anyone who would listen that her, Gigi Eleanor, helps children all over the world. The latest blog post I'd written had gone viral, shared by thousands of people who were reconsidering their assumptions about aging and possibility. What I wish I'd known at 60. Tomorrow, I turn 72. If someone had told me at 60 that my most adventurous, productive, and fulfilling years were still ahead of me, I would have thought they were delusional. We're conditioned to think of life as a mountain you climb until you peak, then it's all downhill. I've learned that life is more like a river. It keeps flowing, sometimes through calm meadows, sometimes through exciting rapids, but always moving towards something new. The secret isn't defying age. It's defying the limitations other people try to attach to age. At 71, I work longer hours than I did at 40. I travel more than I did at 30. I take bigger risks than I did at 20. Not because I'm trying to prove something, but because I finally understand that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important than fear. To anyone reading this who thinks their time for adventure is past, you're wrong. Your time for other people's adventures may have passed. Your time for your own adventure is just beginning. From Paris, with revolution and rebellion. Eleanor. The phone rang, interrupting my evening reflection. Robert Mitchell's name appeared on the screen. Eleanor, I have some news about the Salem house donation. The Children's Hospital Family Support Foundation has accepted your proposal. They want to name it the Thomas and Eleanor Sullivan Family House. I felt a familiar tightness in my throat. That's perfect. There's more. They've asked if you'd be willing to serve on their advisory board. Apparently, your reputation for developing innovative programs has reached Oregon. I laughed. Tell them I'll consider it if they're willing to work around my UNESCO schedule. I already did. They said they'd be honored to accommodate the busiest septuagenarian in the Pacific Northwest. After we hung up, I pulled out my journal, a practice I'd maintained throughout my travels, a way of processing the rapid changes in my life. March 15th, Paris. Today I learned that the house Thomas and I shared for 35 years will become a refuge for other families facing medical crises. There's a poetry to it, the place where we built our private happiness becoming a source of comfort for people who need what we once needed, a safe harbor in the storm. Claire called this afternoon to tell me that Sarah has started telling people she wants to help children like Gigi Eleanor when she grows up. I warned Claire that she might be raising a future humanitarian. Good, she said. The world needs more people like you. The world doesn't need more people like me. The world needs more people like the person I became when I stopped letting other people define my limitations. Tomorrow I fly to Ghana for a 3-week assessment of rural education programs. Next month I'll be in Morocco, working with refugee resettlement organizations. In 6 months, I'll take my first vacation in 3 years. Claire has convinced me to rent a villa in Tuscany where 3 generations of Sullivan women can have what she calls an adventure summit. Thomas couldn't have predicted this life when he left me those careful financial plans. But he understood something I didn't. Money is only powerful when it serves authentic choices. At 71, I'm finally living authentically, and the adventure is just getting started. From Paris, with endless gratitude. Eleanor. As I closed the journal and prepared for bed, I thought about the letter Thomas had left me 4 years ago. You are not helpless. You never have been. He'd been right about the money, right about Claire's intentions, right about my strength. But what he couldn't have known was that his final gift wouldn't just protect me from other people's limitations. It would free me to discover that I had no limitations at all. The woman who'd stood in that Salem study, overwhelmed by grief and other people's expectations, had been afraid that her story was ending. She'd been magnificently, gloriously wrong. This is Eleanor Sullivan, and I'm here to tell you that sometimes the best chapters of your life are the ones nobody else thinks you should write. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that every ending is really just a beginning in disguise. And I'm nowhere near the end.